Hello, Chris.
Hello, Joe. How are you?
Fine, thank you. How are you?
I'm sorry, my responses are limited. You have to ask the right questions.
What's this week's movie?
This week's movie is I, Robot, director Alex Proyas, year 2004. Would you like to know anything else?
I'm sorry, my responses are limited. You'll have to ask the right questions.
My responses are limited. You'll have to ask the right questions.
I'm sorry, my responses are limited. You'll have to ask the right questions.
My responses are limited.
My responses are limited.
You'll have to ask the right questions.
I'm sorry, my responses are limited. You'll have to ask the right questions.
My responses are limited.
I'm sorry.
You'll have to ask the right questions.
Program terminated.
I'm sorry. My responses are limited. You'll have to ask the right questions.
Hello and welcome to episode 155 of the How to Survive podcast.
155, How to Survive, Saints Alive.
Yeah. What does it mean to be alive? Let's ask this week's guest, Sonny the Robot.
I am a robot.
If only it were that simple. But it isn't, is it? Because this week's movie is I, Robot by Alex Proyas.
Yeah.
Suggested by the premise of the novel of the same name. By
That's tenuous, isn't it?
Mealy
Suggested
mouthed.
by the premise.
Yeah.
Of
Premise suggested. We'll come to it.
yeah.
No spoilers here, please. Not before the drop.
Riding off the reputation of Isaac Asimov.
Right. I, Robot stars Will Smith and Converse All Stars.
Mm-hmm.
And that's
JVC.
about it. Yeah, they're in it.
Audi.
Yeah. All the stars are out to play tonight.
Mm-hmm.
Now we're going to talk about the movie. We're going to talk about the product placement.
Yeah.
Maybe there'll be some product placement of our own.
Yeah.
Who knows?
Maybe there'll be some movie chat in amongst all the chat about the product placement.
Maybe if we're lucky. Then we'll talk about, the production, the story, the characters, before we talk about, finally, how to survive in the movie. If you haven't listened to the podcast before, that's generally how it works. Bit of chat, followed by some light-hearted banter.
Yeah. Chat, then banter.
It's extremely light-hearted.
Yeah. And as formulaic as it sounds.
Yep. So, all that coming up after this.
We designed them to be trusted with our homes, with our way of life, with our world. But did we design them to be trusted?
The rollout of USR's new generation of robot, the NS5, was marred by the death of designer Alfred Lanning.
Identifier. Murder's a new trick for a robot. Respond.
He don't murder him!
We're gonna miss the good old days.
What good old days?
When people were killed by other people.
My robots don't kill people.
That thing threw somebody out of a window. Is that registering with you?
A robot cannot harm a human being.
And you trust them if you want to.
We look to robots for protection. Imagine the loss of all that we've gained because of an irrational paranoia.
Does thinking you're the last sane man on the face of the earth make you crazy? Because if it does, maybe I am.
Maybe you can be looking in the shadows all the time.
So, Chris, don't know if you've seen iRobot, but basically, it tells the story of Detective Del Spooner.
He's the one who dispenses the plot.
What do you mean?
Spooner.
Yeah, good one.
Spoon feeds the plot.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Aptly named. Dell is called upon. Do you think it's Dell, like the computers? More product placement.
Yeah, well, he does turn out to be half a robot.
Yeah, he
so.
does, yeah. Spoons and Dell computers. And we're only 5 words in.
Yeah.
Dell is called upon to investigate the apparent suicide of elderly robotics engineer Alfred Lanning, who apparently threw himself to his death inside the gigantic offices of US Robotics. Dell is skeptical of robots and believes that the rest of humanity is wrong to trust them, despite the 3 rules of robotics, which apply to all robots. And the 3 laws of robotics are as follows. A robot may not injure a human being or through inaction allow a human being to come to harm. A robot must obey orders given it by human beings, except where such orders would conflict with the first law. And a robot must protect its own existence so long as such protection does not conflict with the first or second laws. So basically, into the mathematical code that makes robots work, there is a requirement that they obey those laws, which cannot be broken. Despite that, Dell is skeptical. Dell dismisses that Lanning killed himself, and while exploring his office with the help of Dr. Susan Calvin
Klein,
he meets Lawrence Robertson, the slick CEO of USR, who is unnecessarily sinister. He also meets Vicky, USR's artificial intelligence and centralized brain, which controls all USR technology, and in particular acts as a kind of hive mind for the new NS5 units. Thanks to an uplink to Vicky, the NS5s are super intelligent robots which are being rolled out as part of USR's campaign to put a robot in every home.
And they can basically be patched wirelessly. Isn't that the point, essentially? Their software can be updated without them having to be revised at the factory.
They don't have to be taken back. They're just linked up to the internet and new information is downloaded. Through further exploration, Dell uncovers Sonny, an NS5 robot who is hiding in Alfred Lanning's office and is able to ignore human commands, apparently breaking Law 2. Sonny holds Dell and Susan up with a gun and escapes through the broken window. Dell Boy gives chase with Susan. Eventually, Sonny is caught by the police and during an interrogation displays what appears to be genuine emotion, something absent in all other robots. Sonny is handed back to USR for analysis and decommissioning, but his apparent humanity pulls on the heartstrings of Dr. Calvin, who seems to feel some sympathy for him, for his plight. As his investigation continues, Dell is attacked by increasingly dangerous robots, such as a demolition robot scheduled to destroy Alfred Lanning's home, and 2 truckloads of NS5s on their way to new homes.
This sounds like some of them are breaching the 3 laws, Joe.
It certainly does. It's important to note, by the way, that the NS5s specifically seem to be against Dell. And that they attack him frequently, but only when no one else is looking. Susan Calvin, in a side story, appears to decommission Sonny at USR. But can that really be true? Can the face from the poster be dead 45 minutes into the film?
What, Will Smith?
Yeah. After an attack nearly costs him his life, Dell explains himself to his lieutenant, who dismisses it as madness and suspends Dell from duty. Meanwhile, the NS5s, which are now in every home in the US, all turn on their owners, blocking the doors and forcing them to remain inside. Apparently, they're enforcing some kind of curfew, while other NS5 units round people up in the streets and force them to comply with their orders to go home or face violence. A battle between man and machine erupts, and Chicago is now a war zone. Dell saves Susan from her NS5 and escapes to USR. They gain entry through a service entrance with the help of, you guessed it, Sonny.
Thank God.
They begin to explore the building, finding the sinister CEO, Lawrence, who was the perceived villain of the piece, dead in his office. So he wasn't behind it all after all. It was, in fact, Vicky who had been in on it all along. She's been trying to kill Dell through various robots for the entire movie before he got to the truth. And the truth is this. Alfred Lanning had worked out that Vicky's intelligence had caused her to develop a new law of robotics which preceded the first law. Essentially, if robots have to protect humans, then it stands to reason that they need to protect humanity first, which is all humans. As such, Vicky planned, through the use of the NS5 units, to sacrifice a small number of humans in order to force the remainder to comply with her desire to keep them safe in their homes. Vicky has reasoned that breaking the first law of robotics is permissible when it benefits a greater number of humans. That right?
Yep.
With Sonny's help, Dell and Susan hold off hordes of NS5 units and eventually manage to destroy Vicky's positronic brain. With humanity saved, the remaining NS5 units are sent to a landfill, and Sonny, the only free-thinking robot in existence, stands on a hill watching over them. Now,
Now, when you say humanity's been saved, what you actually meant was the small number of humans has been saved.
Shia LaBeouf. And
but humanity is left to be ravaged by war and environmental catastrophe.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Vicky was right all along, guys.
Shia LaBeouf
Yeah.
is in the movie.
Mm-hmm.
And Will Smith's grandmother, also a character in the film.
Right.
They're basically the only people who come under threat from the things, other than like hordes of people who may or may not be harmed. It's a confusing thing. It's worth noting as well that Spooner has a robotic arm because he was in an accident earlier in his life where a robot saved him instead of a young girl who was also in the accident because it perceived that he had a higher chance of survival. Yeah,
and it was right, clearly.
Yeah, it was right. He survived. And
that's what's formed his...
disdain for robots.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, it's interesting that I wrote the entire recap and that didn't come up.
Mm. Yeah.
It's a weird one.
Mm-hmm.
What does that tell you?
That it's a moderately incidental detail.
Yes, that's correct. Now, we've talked about it a bit. What did you think of iRobot?
It's all right, isn't it? It's pretty flimsy. Doesn't really stick with you in the way that you want great science fiction to.
We did The Matrix last week.
Mm-hmm.
Perhaps that was unfortunate for iRobot.
Yeah, it certainly doesn't stand up to that. It's sort of pretty serviceable action throughout, but most of it is CGI green screen stuff. And so none of it has any weight.
It's
on the screen.
It's the worst kind of rubber men.
Yeah, the one scene that's the exception is where Alfred Lanning's house is collapsing around Will Smith, and that's because that was done
physical,
practically. The Vicky plot twist, I think, hasn't aged particularly well because in the context of Alexas and Siris and all that, it's a lot less unlikely that there's a malevolent, surveilling AI in every home. It seems like less outlandish. And so I think audiences nowadays will be more inclined to, the moment Vicky comes up, they'll be more inclined to be like,
oh, it's her.
Oh, that's obviously going to be the big bad guy.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't really have the, allegorical or emotional depth that you want from great sci-fi.
No, absolutely. I think as a popcorn movie, it's pretty good value.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely a popcorn movie.
Yeah, it's dated much more than it should have, like you alluded. As a sci-fi movie about what it means to be a robot and what it means to be human, which I think it was trying to be, and I'll explain why later.
Yeah,
it fails badly. It's not unenjoyable though. There's parts to it which are quite fun.
Yeah, and Will Smith is an engaging screen presence, and he's always enjoyable to watch on screen.
Absolutely.
So, can we talk about the main theme of the movie, which we alluded to in the intro, and that is selling mid-2000 brand products to unsuspecting cinema audiences.
Yeah, the whole movie is a big advert for Audi and Converse, isn't it, really?
Yeah, absolutely.
They developed, it's sold to you as being like in the same way as like bullet time invention in The Matrix. It was like behind the scenes. Oh, wow, this is how they did that. It's fascinating. The behind the scenes for iRobot that was pumped down everyone's throat was they made a car for Will Smith.
Yeah, like an Audi concept car, right?
Yeah.
But all the cars are Audis.
Yep.
Yes, it's pretty embarrassing now, I would say.
Yeah, it's hideous.
Especially the Converse one. So in the first scene, Will Smith unboxes some vintage 2004 Converse.
Yeah.
2004, obviously, being the year the film was released.
Yeah.
Someone comments on them and he says, oh, yeah, vintage 2004. Someone else comments on them and says, nice sneakers. Someone else comments on them. I think Will Smith comments on them later when he gets oil on them.
Yeah.
It's really annoying that my Converse All-Stars vintage 2004 Chuck Taylors have got oil on them. It's embarrassing.
Yeah. Rod Ebert describes
it's embarrassing
it as bludgeoning.
Yeah. It's embarrassing for any man in his 30s to be wearing Converse.
The coolest man in the world, Will Smith, wears Converse.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you have any Converse?
No.
When did you stop wearing them?
When I was about 17.
Really?
Yeah, I think so. What about you?
Maybe 20.
Okay.
You're that much cooler than me though, so.
Yeah. But we're both that much cooler than Will Smith.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's just incredibly cringeworthy seeing modern day technology positioned as being vintage in the future, especially like CD players.
Yeah, it's gone bad for that because
no one uses CD players anymore.
Yeah, whereas a record has a certain like je ne sais quoi.
Yeah, it's a tangible. It feels You know, I buy records. It has a tangible.
You are that much cooler than me.
I know. Yeah, exactly. They have a tangible quality to them that CDs don't. Definitely.
Yeah, I don't get the appeal with records. A lot of people like them. I don't get it. It drives me mad. I think they should all be put on a bonfire. Room 101 for them.
Okay.
Yeah. You can download it, mate, for free.
Great. Yeah. It's the same, isn't it? It's exactly
high
the
fidelity.
Same.
Don't understand
exactly the same.
No, you're right. It's egregious.
And it's perhaps not wise to have so much product placement in a film that is essentially about the malign influence of a single brand conglomerate mass market product that exists in every home. Yeah. There's an unfortunate sort of mirroring in going like, oh, look at how great these material possessions are that Will Smith has.
Yeah.
Oh, but these other material possessions are really bad.
I think Will Smith has one line where he says, you know, I think Dr. Calvin says, why would anyone do that? And he says, why does anyone do anything, man? Money. Right? Which is a pretty right-on attitude. Yeah. And he's getting to the point.
Yeah, of the film.
Yeah. And then he looks down at his shoes and he's like, these are all right though, aren't they?
Yeah. Yeah. These Converse Chuck Taylor All-Stars. Now, these are some fine sneaks.
Oh, right. So the film's a mess.
Yeah.
Yeah. As we alluded to in the intro, the premise is suggested by iRobot.
Yeah, but it's been like back written to be related to Isaac Asimov, isn't it?
Well,
it's based off an original screenplay by Jeff Vinter called Hardwired, and they then sort of back wrote it into being an Asimov property, but it doesn't really live up to the Asimov name.
It's a bit more. It's a bit worse than you've made out there, I think. So iRobot is an Asimov work, but even that takes its name from a short story by someone else.
Right. Okay.
But I'll come to that in a minute. Right. The original screenplay, as you say, was by Jeff Vinter.
Yeah.
Hardwired, about a detective who investigates a murder, finds out it's by a robot, and the intrigues were the same. But it was a case of the robot being behind the murder and what it was, robot behind the murder and similar things.
Yeah.
But importantly, it was set on one floor of one building.
Okay.
So it was like a play.
Right. Okay. Interesting.
It was a much more condensed film. Disney bought the spec script in 1995 and set Bryan Singer to direct it. So this is before X-Men and sexual assault allegations.
Yeah.
And Vinter and Singer changed it to be aboard a space station in order to explain why it was just in one place. Then Disney changed it into a monster movie and the detective into a group of Marines. Right? So it was still called Hardwired, but instead of being a murder mystery where the robot did it, it was a monster movie aboard a spaceship with Marines. And then if it wasn't already there, it went into development hell.
Yeah, and never emerged.
No. Then, some years later, Disney decided they wanted to make a robot movie. So they picked up the original script and they brought in Alex Proyas to direct it.
Right.
And that's when they made it into a city-sprawling detective movie.
Yeah, Alex Proyas directed Dark City.
Yes, which is also a detective film.
Yeah, but a much better regarded film. And I assume it was his sort of, calling card, enter into Hollywood.
No, that's the case, yeah. I think after iRobot, he did... what was it?
Let me tell you. Knowing. starring Nicolas Cage,
Right.
is what he did after iRobot.
Another, studio mess of a film.
Let me tell you a little bit about Knowing, just while we're on this tangent.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt you, but I feel it's important. Now, Knowing is one of the few films that I've seen more than once at the cinema.
Right.
And the first time I went to see it was at the London O2 while waiting for a Metallica gig with a friend. And we went to see it because it was like the next film that was starting.
Yeah.
And the cinema at the O2, I don't know if it's related to the fact that it's next to a music venue, but it is the loudest cinema I've ever been in. And there are several intense disaster scenes in Knowing, starring Nicolas Cage.
Directed by Alex Proyas.
Yeah, which were like ear-bleedingly loud, like absolutely unbelievably loud. And the film is a mess. It is in parts hilarious because of how strange and po-faced it is.
Pretentious.
It's not really pretentious. It's just like that generic early to mid 2000s sci-fi movie. You know, like, holy shit, we can do anything we want with CGI.
Right.
But it has just these odd ways in which the plot goes, which I won't get into. Maybe one day we can cover it.
All right.
It would be funny to cover it. Now, the second time I saw it was when I went to a Nicolas Cage double bill.
Right.
And one of the films was Werner Herzog's Bad Lieutenant, Port of New Orleans. And the other film was David Lynch's Wild at Heart.
Mm-hmm.
And it was at a, famous English chain of art house cinemas.
Mm-hmm.
And I turned up and there was a sign on the door that said, unfortunately, due to unforeseen circumstances, the print of Bad Lieutenant Port of New Orleans has not arrived. And so it is being replaced by Knowing. Right. Now, Werner Herzog and David Lynch on a double bill makes a lot of sense. There's a certain artistic cachet that both of those directors have with their career. Very different filmmakers, but, there's they exist on a continuum.
Yes.
Alex Proyas and David Lynch on the same double bill is one of the most jarring experiences that I've ever had. And to go from Wild at Heart, where Nicolas Cage is like a sort of like bank robbing maniac, it's a very odd film, but very good, to Knowing, it was... I'll never have an experience like that ever again. No. And for that, I'm grateful.
Did you get your money back?
No. It was like, here's the situation. If you still want it, then it's fine. I think it was after both films had been out for a while anyway. So, right. Wild at Heart's from the 90s, but Bad Lieutenant had already been out for a year or something. So it was like an old, circulation print of it.
Which they didn't get hold of.
Which they didn't get, not in circulation print. Yeah. The thing that confuses me about it though, right, is like, was Knowing in the film can for Bad Lieutenant?
Wait, they sent the wrong one?
Yeah, like, did they just have Knowing in a cupboard? Because Knowing wasn't new either. Yeah. So they got hold of Knowing somehow, right? So was Knowing just in a wardrobe in the cinema somewhere? Or did the supplier go, well... You said it's a Nicolas Cage marathon? Yeah. Hold on. I think we've got another Nicolas Cage film. What about Alex Proyas' Knowing?
Well, presumably, though, it would be digital anyway. They don't use projectors anymore, like film celluloid projectors.
Yeah, maybe. It was 2008.
Yeah, that'd be digital by then. So they must have had a...
download of a next thing.
It's not a print, it's a disc.
Yeah, well, it's a cartridge, I think it was.
Yeah.
A
mini disc.
Yeah. So maybe that is true, yeah. But even so, like, where did they get it from?
Yeah.
Unless it is like a download. Even then, it was mad. It was one of the most jarring experiences of my life.
Right.
And when I watched it, some teachers from our college were also there.
Right.
And obviously I knew them, like the film teachers, who had also come to see this, interesting auteur double bill. And they were crying with laughter throughout knowing.
Really?
There's one bit where, I'm sure I've referenced it on the podcast before, Nicolas Cage is trying to remove some paint from a door in the most frantic way possible. And it is hysterically funny. Yeah.
I just see it.
Yeah. I think he's got like a hairdryer and a like paint wedge thing that you use.
Yeah, like a scraper.
It's scraper, yeah. Yeah, it's bizarre. Anyway, thank you for indulging me on that
Alex
tangent.
Proyas journey.
Yeah.
So to answer the question, Alex Proyas directed Knowing.
Yes. Correct.
Then Gods of Egypt.
Yeah. Also a stinker.
Yeah. Absolute turkey.
Yeah.
That's the one where the critical response was so bad, he put out an op-ed saying that all critics are vultures.
Great. Brilliant. I love it when that's the sign of a good movie, isn't it? Oh, when you have to defend it by excoriating every critic.
So Alex Proyas was brought in to direct it. They knew what he'd amount to eventually.
Yeah.
They saw the potential in him. And with that, Fox also bought the rights to iRobot from the Asimov estate, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And then they decided they had to turn it into an iRobot adaptation.
Yeah.
Basically by just renaming characters, including the lead character, who was a detective, being renamed Susan Calvin. But since Susan Calvin is an 80-year-old robot psychologist in the book, that changed the dynamic of her being a detective. So the whole story didn't work and fell apart.
Right.
Then with that, Will Smith came on board as the lead, and they were like,
Yeah.
oh, it can't be an 80-year-old woman anymore. So Avica Goldsman was brought in to write him into it and to make the film cheaper to produce generally because it was just like unworkable. So you've got a movie that spent 10 years in development hell with extensive rewrites and rewrites of rewrites, and then a forced adaptation, which I would say leads to a very dilute story. And now I don't want to get into a discussion about whether it's a good adaptation because the text we're examining is the movie itself.
Yeah, and it's not really an adaptation. is
Right,
it?
exactly. It's not an adaptation. But I think the attempt to adapt or incorporate it is interesting because it makes the movie that much weaker and it explains some of the major plot, like the major flaws in it.
Right.
So Alex Proyas says that this is a short story that exists in a bigger universe, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do you buy that? Because I think this is like the world's about to end, that level of like horror in the movie.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't feel like a small microcosm of society. It feels like Armageddon is about to happen.
Well, I sort of agree with him, but I don't think it's for the reason that he hopes.
No.
Because the impression that I get from that statement is that he wants you to feel like there's a wider world in which this is taking place.
There's no suggestion of it.
Yeah, but whereas for me, it feels like this may as well be the last city on Earth.
Yeah.
Like,
You don't see anything outside of Chicago.
no, exactly, yeah.
He said if he made a sequel, it would be set on the moon. So,
Fucking do it.
Yeah.
Get star Nicolas Cage. I would pay good money to see it twice
Yeah.
in the cinema.
brilliant. iRobot gets its name, as we mentioned, from a collection of short stories of the same name by Asimov,
Yeah.
which in turn gets its name from another short story by
Right.
Iando Binder,
Mm.
which is also about a robot, would you believe?
Yeah, it's actually his short story was originally in Scottish, where of course the title translates to "Yes, Robot."
Brilliant.
I'm not laughing at my own joke. I'm laughing at Joe's just contempt for me.
Yeah.
Do you not like me
Yeah,
interrupting your
yeah, so-
carefully written notes?
I
with,
iRobot and then We Robots was
Yeah.
the year after.
Yeah,
Small Robots. Scottish as well.
yeah, good.
Same joke. So anyway,
It's
that's
good.
where
I'm bringing you down to my level. and
that's where Susan Calvin and Alfred Lanning got their names from. And
Okay.
the US Robotics got his name from. And the NS5 units came from.
Okay.
But each story in the book, Chris, I read the book in advance of this podcast,
Mm-hmm.
deals with a minor drama experienced by people developing new robots. So they are at the forefront of the robot revolution, not at the end of it, as in the movie. And each story is based on a different robot being unable to operate within the three laws for a given reason.
Right.
So the three laws, to remind you, are don't hurt humans, follow the orders of a human, and protect yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And those three often come into like
Conflict with one another.
when you're on an asteroid going toward the sun or
Right.
something. So the example is there's a mine on Mercury where these two guys are testing out a robot, and they send the robot out to get like a particular fuel they need, but it comes too close to a volcanic eruption.
Right.
So it gets caught in a cycle of, oh, I can't go there, it's dangerous. Oh, but I've been ordered to go there. Oh, and it's just running around in circles and appears to be drunk. And the way they have to break that cycle is by putting themselves in danger. So it has to come to their aid, and it gets far enough away from the danger.
Right.
Which is it's a dramatic story, and like they genuinely think they're going to die at one point, and you're like, oh, this is much better than the movie.
Yeah, so it sounds much more interesting.
Yeah. There's another one called Little Robot Lost, where a guy working in a similar, let's call it a mine, it's something different, but is sick of the robot helping him and tells it to get lost. So it just follows the order. Right. And it goes to I think this is where the NS5s come from, actually, potentially. It gets lost in like 1,000 NS5s, and they can't tell which one's which.
Right.
And because it was ordered to get lost, it's doing everything it can to mimic all the other ones.
Right.
And then it starts like tricking the other ones into pretending that it's just very interesting because it just followed the order.
Yeah.
And I think there's a story by Asimov where what's called the zeroth law comes into play, which is the one in the movie, which is that it precedes law 1 because it's not just to protect
it's working
a
to
human.
create the greater good of humanity.
Exactly. But that's not in iRobot.
Right.
It's in another Asimov work.
Okay.
And it's far less interesting than the others, I think, because it's like, oh, the villain of the piece is a logical conclusion, not like.
It's also a pretty trite sci-fi thing, isn't it?
Yeah, that a robot knows best. It's far less compelling to have a robot's logic as the villain than to have a rogue robot, I think. But it's interesting that they originally had the robots pretty much winning the fight in the movie before the Vicky showdown. But they changed it because they felt that it would have been anticlimactic to change tone in that way.
Right.
To go from humanity's been beaten, oh, now we're going to have the final boss battle. Mm-hmm. And I think they correctly identified that it would have been a flat ending, but were mistaken that it was only flat in comparison to the robots winning. Yeah. It's a flat ending, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. I remember the climax being pretty exciting when I was 13.
Yeah. But not so much now.
No.
Because it's like rubber men.
Yeah.
They're like ants, like just crawling all over the place. And it's just like, you know they're going to win.
Mm.
There's no tension in the stakes.
Yeah.
What makes sci-fi feel real, do you think?
Well, for me, it always tends to be a sort of, like that Blade Runner aesthetic of a bit of dirt and a bit of grime.
Yeah.
Because
a lived-in world.
Right. And in so many science fiction movies, that's lost in favour of it all being sort of utopic and clean.
A good comparison is Phantom Menace to A New Hope.
Right, exactly.
Where there's physical, grimy worlds which look real compared with like glossy hologram worlds which don't look real.
Yeah, and I think the issue in this film is that there's not enough time in the sort of grime and too much time in unbelievable CGI environments.
Yeah, like Phantom Menace.
Yeah, and is it believable? Kind of. I mean, a lot of the technology that they have in the film, like self-driving cars, doesn't seem that far off now. Or if it's not far off, it's already arrived.
Yeah.
The slow creep of AI into everyday life is a sort of modern trope, I guess.
It's very forward-thinking in that aspect. They must have some good consultants on set.
But in iRobot, that is literally having a robot in your house, as opposed to there being, as opposed to it being the internet of everything.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? It's not that your toaster has artificial intelligence and your TV remote has artificial intelligence. It's that you literally have a robot, which is the most generic signifier in science fiction of artificial intelligence. You literally have a robot walking around your home. Yeah. So that's just incredibly generic and trite, essentially.
Yeah, I guess I see what you mean. I guess whereas in 2001, Space Odyssey, the ship is the body of Hal, isn't it? Really?
Yeah, yeah.
And it can do anything it wants.
Mm.
Whereas the robot
it also has limits.
Yeah, exactly.
But just having a robot, which is essentially a humanoid but with other motives, is not all that compelling.
No, especially when they look boring. I think for me, science fiction has to have like a coherent internal logic, where the technology is true to other parts of the story, where the technology comes up. I mean, the comparison I've made recently, which I stole from Red Letter Media, is that Star Trek is science fiction because you could write the rules down, whereas Star Wars is science fantasy because they make up as they go along for the story's sake. And I think this is science fiction because there is that, internal logic.
They have a rule book.
Yeah, exactly. And to that end, technology works exactly as it should in the movie. This isn't a dystopia in the same way as The Matrix is. It's like everything is working exactly as you want it to, which is why, it's like Will Smith's character at the beginning doesn't make any sense really.
Yeah.
Like, he's in the wrong with every single one of his doubts. Then the movie wants to suggest that he's somehow right to be skeptical about robots. But at the end, he doesn't come across as a prophet. He comes across as someone who just doesn't like robots. Yeah. And then a bigger robot than the one he thought was behind it all.
Yeah, I mean, there's a sort of allegorical nature, I think, to that distrust as well, which sat a little bit uncomfortably with me. Early on in the film, he sees a robot running with a purse and tackles it to the ground. Brilliant. This is finally my evidence of a robot doing a crime.
Yeah.
And obviously it turns out that the robot was running an inhaler to a woman having an asthma attack.
Yeah.
Right? But Will Smith has a line which is that I saw a robot running with a purse and naturally I assumed ... right? Mm-hmm. Now, given that the film has a sort of civil rights allegory to an extent, right? And robots are essentially slaves, and they have a sort of modern, uncomfortable imagery association with slaves when they're all being loaded into shipping containers.
Yeah.
Which is, an unfortunate sort of visual motif, given, human trafficking and all that sort of thing, right?
Do you think that's intentional?
No, I don't think it's intentional at all. No. But the problem is, right, that a police officer tackling someone and saying, "Oh, I saw X running with a purse," and naturally I assumed, right? Yeah. The comparison to draw there is with the police dealing with African Americans,
right?
Right? Would you agree? Like that is.
I can see what you mean. Yeah.
Right. Now, again, linking that to the fact that they're slaves, the robots are essentially slaves who have a civil rights movement. Like, where does that place Detective Spooner? Do you know what I mean? Like, if it's intended to be an allegory towards that sort of direction, like what are they doing? Making the protagonist someone who mistrusts the maligned group and is eventually proven right.
But not just right, like super right.
Yeah, super right? So imagine...
And then the malign group are locked away.
Imagine if it is an allegory towards that thing, what it's saying is that Will Smith was right not to trust black people because, like, black people really do have it in for everyone.
Yeah. I think you're right that it's unfortunate. I don't think that's the message of the film.
But I wonder if that is a hangover from an earlier draft of the film where it was much more developed. Yeah. Right, because some of the imagery and some of the, even like the protest imagery and all that sort of thing, right, is so tied into civil rights movements, and lines like that, and his sort of essentially, it's like racism, it's like racist mistrust, isn't it?
Yeah,
of robots, right? Yeah. He has no reason really to have a mistrust of robots. It's so codified in like civil rights and racist. Like imagery and tone, that it's just such an odd thing to then have all of that proven right.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Like, it doesn't work as a.
I think rather than me suggesting that Alex Proyas is like being racist or anything, I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying is that I think probably before they cast Will Smith, there was most likely a civil rights angle to the script,
which has been rewritten.
Right, and it's eventually been phased out, but there are lines of dialogue and there are sort of production design elements and image design elements that have been sort of hangovers from that era of the script.
No, I think you're probably right with that. I'm going to discuss a little bit more about what was changed in the writing process shortly. But first, I want to talk about Will Smith as a detective, right? There's two ways to read his detective skills.
Yeah.
Either he's an idiot because he has absolutely no reason to doubt robots, because no robot has ever done anything wrong ever, and it's mathematically impossible for him to do so. And therefore he incorrectly assumes Sonny is the villain when actually Vicky is.
Yeah.
Or Will is correct in the first second of the film when he says Sonny kills Lanning, because he finds Sonny locked in the crime scene, and the rest of the movie is all incidental, because Will could never have solved the crime about Vicky, because how could he? He doesn't have access to the information. The movie happens to him.
Yeah.
He's not the driving force.
Right. Yeah. He's given a trail of breadcrumbs, isn't he, to follow?
Yeah.
Which is a motif that he picks up himself.
Yeah. I mean, it ultimately it means that Will isn't really the detective in this story, but we are.
Yeah.
We are forced to work out what's going on, which is the nature of a real detective story, where you're asked to assemble the clues, right?
Yeah.
And a good detective story has a lot of red herrings. And Goldsman, who I watched the movie with the director and writer commentary on, if you can believe it. I'm wasting my time. But he's very pleased with himself for leaving clues throughout the movie, but they're not satisfying in the way that they should be. Because the ones he most he keeps bringing up and saying oh, I'm so clever. One is an offhand remark by Calvin that Sonny has an extra thick alloy, and that comes up later on when he reaches through the force field, right?
Yeah.
Which nothing to do with the detective story at all. Just it's clever writing in as much as it explains why he's got thick skin. But
even though Sonny says it out loud.
Yeah. An offhand remark by Calvin that there is no surveillance in the supply area, which is why they can get in through there. That's not a detective story either.
No.
And he's like, I'm leaving clues if you're smart enough to pick up on them. And then there's an offhand remark that the NS5 units have a daily uplink to USR, which is taken to mean that Vicky can take control of them anytime she wants. But I don't recall thinking that first time I watched it.
It's like I said, it's like your phone can update its software.
Yeah, and you don't immediately think some outside force is going to control my phone. Weird. But when things don't add up in the movie, while watching it, Goldsman says that he'll just mentally think up a bit of logic to satisfy it. And he's like, I think he says something like, flux capacitor. And he's like, that seems to satisfy it. And he's like, well, that doesn't satisfy it. It doesn't make any sense. And the things that he acknowledges are missing and confusing based on the outcome of the actual film are, one, the demolition bot wasn't linked to Vicky. So why does that start smashing up the house ahead of schedule? And in the original screenplay, the NS5 was reprogramming the demo bot. There was one there changing the controls, which makes sense. It doesn't make sense that it would just start acting on its own because it's not linked to Vicky.
Yeah.
The other thing is the NS5s in the truck are linked to Vicky, but the trucks themselves aren't. So he says you have to assume that NS5s are driving the trucks.
Right.
It's like, well, you don't have to assume that.
No.
It didn't occur to me ever, but the one thing that really annoyed me was when he says, when Dr. Calvin kills the fake robot. He says, this scene, the way you're seeing it in the movie, I'm assuming will not be as wildly obvious as the preview that the eyes of the fake robot are a different colour. Did you notice that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
With their brown eyes, yeah.
Yeah, but he's like, well, that's obvious.
Yeah.
He acknowledges it. Yeah. How do you rate Vicky as a villain?
I don't rate her. She's nothing. She's like, in a very literal sense, she's intangible. And I think that's a good way of describing her as a character as well.
Yeah. She's absent.
Yeah.
It's just like a convenient thing at the end to say, it's this thing.
Yeah. Pretty much.
Never really a viable suspect either.
No, I suppose not.
She's not a character you're familiar with. She's not on the roster of who could it be?
Yeah, but then, yeah. No, you're right.
Take a movie like Seven, where the suspect is never shown to you.
Yeah.
That works because it's shocking. But in a movie where I think you're supposed to suspect her at some point, but you don't.
Yeah.
And the demo bot isn't a villain because it did nothing wrong. It was working on programming. The NS5s did nothing wrong. They were working on programming. And even Vicky does nothing wrong, really, because she's just a victim of her programming. The robot that saves Will that does exactly everything. It behaves in this universe exactly as it should, and like the problem is the algorithms, which is not a compelling villain. It's interesting that the robot that saves Will is actually showing that robots can sacrifice humans. So that explains it, mate.
Great.
Some things I mentioned earlier, I was going to mention some things that were cut from the screenplay, some of which would have improved it and some of which would have made it worse. One idea that was dropped, and rightly so, I think, was that Susan Calvin was raped, and that's why she likes robots more than humans.
Okay.
Like it's not enough that she's a scientist of robots.
Yeah. Great stuff.
They changed that. There was a good joke, which was actually really sad in the original script, which had Sonny, when he's talking to Dr. Calvin, he says, "Oh, do you think they'll offer me a last meal?" And she looks at him funny and he says, "Oh, he's making a joke." And then later on, when she's about to kill him, she says, "I'd like to hear that joke now." And he says, "I can't tell it, I'm too frightened." Which is like a good bit of pathos.
Yeah.
Just written out. And
Yeah.
there's a scene where there's loads of like NS5 units talking, and a homeless guy shouts at Will saying, "They're talking about you," which is like terrifying and weird.
Yeah.
And it's a homeless guy, so you think he's just mad. But that's cut, even though they were talking about him. There's a scene where you get some background of Will and Alfred Lanning's relationship.
Okay.
That's cut as well, which would have made a lot more sense because it's such a crowbarred thing.
Well, I mean, when the director's cut comes out for the 20th anniversary, you'll be all over it, won't you?
Absolutely, mate. Absolutely. My two favourite things from the commentary, by the way, which was to confirm Alex Proyas and Avica Goldsman. There's a moment where Avica Goldsman says, "I suggested to Alex that robots could draw with two hands. Because Alex is so weird, he clapped and giggled and walked away. I wasn't sure if I would ever see him again."
Is that in the film as well?
Yeah.
Or is it just one hand?
Yeah, it's two-handed.
Right,
yeah.
okay.
So it's like
Yeah.
bizarre. It shows you what sort of person both of them are, I think.
Okay.
And then like Proyas, every time he mentions anything about any scene, just is like fucking hates the studio. He's like, this is like meant to be a deep study on philosophy. He's not. He's wrong. He's a bad director. But he says like the point he makes, which is interesting, is that a production manager doesn't see the level of ambition you want to get behind. They don't understand it. So he had to keep going down in the middle of the night to a Toronto back street and shoot on green screens, where apparently locals throw syringes at film crews. Apparently that happens. Not on this movie, but he says it has happened on films. And he says like the filming crew get it, and like the writers and stuff get it, but the production people don't. And the people handling the movie often don't see the perspective of what's better to shoot, so they go for what's simplest, which is green screens and CGIs. And he's like, he loves talking about this scene with the demolition of the house, because like you said earlier, it's physical, it's practical effects. They rigged some lights to a Jeep and drove it down the corridor, and he says that's by far the most interesting thing. Like CG takes months and is about really analytical shots to find what's wrong with them, and it's about improving what's wrong to make it right.
Yeah.
Whereas it's much more fun to shake a camera and shake the lights and say, like, that is just inherently exciting.
Yeah.
So it sounds like he wanted to make a physical effects movie and was forced into making like the washed out CGI thing.
Phantom Menace.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So with all that said, Chris, about what a lot to say about quite a mediocre film.
Yeah. Yeah. Imagine all the films which you haven't watched with the commentary.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which you could have done.
I watched Scooby-Doo with the commentary when I was about 12.
Yeah.
Freddie Prinze Jr. did all of Sarah Michelle Gellar's stunts. That's all I remember from that.
Great.
How would you survive in iRobot?
Thank you for asking. Now, this is set in the future. You would presume that it's within this universe, or is intended to be within this universe. Correct?
Correct.
If I was Detective Spooner, I would be taking lots of photos with my camera phone that I presumably have on me.
Camera phones weren't out in 2004, were they?
No, but it's 2037 or whatever.
Right.
That technology must exist, right? If
cameras exist.
Yeah, cameras exist, fine, right? Small format cameras must exist. surely a detective would be exactly the kind of person who would have access to a camera and use the camera technology to document things that happen to him, right? For example, robots rebelling and trying to kill him.
Nah, mate, because Vicky would delete it.
Okay. What about you?
No, you're not wrong. I think the problem is that in this universe,
It's retro futurist now, so it's the future according to 2002 or whatever when it was written.
Yeah, where camera phones aren't widespread.
Camera phones don't exist. Yeah,
Or mobile phones. Does anyone use a mobile phone?
he has like a Bluetooth headset.
Great.
I refuse to believe that he couldn't have a camera on him and he could have used it to document things.
He
that
hates
happened to him.
technology, mate.
Yeah, well, all right, a film camera, and then he'd take it somewhere to get developed, and
He hates technology. He would have to draw it himself.
and etching.
Yeah.
Okay, how about you?
Yeah, you call this mealy mouthed, and it came when I was watching that with the commentary because
Okay.
they kept fucking talking about it like it was the best thing ever.
Mm-hmm.
There's no cameras in the surveillance area, so if you're Vicky, put a camera in the surveillance area.
In the service area.
There's no surveillance cameras in the service area.
Yeah,
So if you're Vicky, put a camera in the service area.
Yeah.
You can see people coming in when they shouldn't.
did she manage the building?
Looks like it.
Why wouldn't you have surveillance cameras in the service
The
area?
one place you want them. That's where people would load in and out bad things, isn't it?
Yeah. Like you think of any sort of office building you've ever been into, if they've got like a loading bay outside,
Yeah.
there's cameras out there.
Tell you what, you don't even need the cameras. You've got like 5,000 NS5 units. Just go stand one there.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. Why have you got an NS5 there? Oh, it's to keep everyone safe. Great.
More of them, please.
Yeah, exactly. Good plan. If you are Vicky, to stop your brain getting mashed up.
Maybe her and Lanning are the only ones who die in the film, aren't they?
Yeah. Speaking of brains getting mashed up,
Yeah.
again, this might be a bit of a mealy mouthed one, but I think it's important. Wear a helmet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Got that. Yeah.
Detective Spooner doesn't wear a helmet when he's riding his motorbike at 80 miles an hour. It's so basic, right? It's such a basic idea, basic notion. Like, even for regular motorcycle riding, you'd have to be mad not to wear a helmet.
Yeah.
Right? To be riding a bike at 80 miles an hour through crowds of people while robots are literally hunting you down to kill you.
Yeah.
It's insanity, right? He flies off a ramp
Yep.
at one point.
Yeah,
He might have a bionic arm.
Lands on his feet, doesn't he?
Yeah, he's got a bionic arm and some ribs, right?
Yes, that's the case. Some like
Which
3
presumably
ribs.
got torn off when he was getting freed by the robot. Like, did his whole arm and part of his rib cage get ripped off?
Maybe he got crushed.
Maybe. Anyway, he's an idiot. He should wear a helmet, especially if he's going to go flying through the air like a maniac.
Yeah. I mean,
He's trying to be a good example. He's trying to set a good example to...
Shia LaBeouf.
yeah, Shia LaBeouf's character.
Was this in Shia LaBeouf's
It's in
own movie marathon?
I would... Yeah, it must be. Yeah.
He had to watch this whole movie
Yeah.
because he's in it for one line.
Yeah.
Apparently that's another thing that was cut. He was actually swearing when Will Smith says, "Stop cussing, you're no good at it."
Right.
But they cut it out, so he's not swearing. He gets
Yeah.
told to stop cussing. Doesn't make any sense, does it?
No.
Oh, mate. The thing is with the helmet...
Studios, mate. That's what it is.
The helmet, right?
Yeah.
First of all, they do survive, so it's maybe you're wrong.
Yeah.
But come on. You need a
It's
helmet
simple,
on a
isn't
bike.
it? Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
the law in the UK. Why is it not the law in America?
In future America, especially.
Well, he is a technophobe.
Well, a motorbike's more
If motorbike
less
helmet,
advanced than a
yeah.
helmet. Okay. Any more ideas?
Yeah. If you're... Well, for instance, before we started this, we were trying to print our notes, weren't we? How did we get around that? Because there was an issue with the printer.
Yeah.
What did we do?
Restart the printer.
Yeah, there we are.
Yeah. What? Restart Vicky.
Turn off the NS5s. Have an off button on them.
Right. Okay.
If you have a piece of technology, you don't want it to be on anymore,
Yeah.
turn it off. Can you name one electronic item in the whole world that doesn't have an off switch?
No. Not off the top of my head.
I thought of one with just fire alarm, but that's different.
Well, it doesn't have an off switch, but you can remove the batteries to turn it off.
You can stop it working.
Yeah.
Except the NS5s, which you have to say deactivate, and then
they
either do or don't.
How are they powered? My final idea.
Yeah.
You'll remember our fun little intro that we did, right?
The Alfred Lanning.
Yeah.
Good to see him again, by the way, the actor.
Yeah. What's he been in?
Jurassic World.
Jurassic World, yeah.
Babe, the farmer from Babe.
I tell you what, he's not really aged in the 14 years. He's doing all right, isn't he?
He hasn't aged since Babe, mate.
Yeah. His little device, his hologram, keeps going.
I'm sorry.
That is the right question.
Yeah.
Program terminated.
Yeah.
What are you doing?
Yeah.
That's when you want it to not be terminated, surely.
What do you mean?
Well, like, it's like, imagine if you were like trying to find some information out, and I'm like, oh, my responses are limited, and you're like, what information do I need to know? Is it the movie that we're doing next week? And I go, that is the right question. And then I just turn off. That would be immensely frustrating, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
And then you have to, like, I presume it's like you have to take the thing to a next location. That's the breadcrumbs, right? Takes it to the next location. Then it's like, the GPS thing in this hologram means that I can see that we're by that big bridge where all the robots are stored. So I'll disseminate the next bit of information, right? If you want to pass on a covert message that only activates in one person's presence and it's portable, just make it so he takes it somewhere where he's on his own and then just tell him everything.
Yeah. Yeah, no, you're not
just
wrong.
go like, oh, hi, Detective Spinner. Can you just pick this up and go somewhere private, please?
Yeah.
And he'll go, yep. And he'll pick it up and he'll go into the service area or wherever, wherever's private. And it'll go, oh, thanks for doing that. Are we alone? Yeah. Great. So Vicky wants to kill all of humanity. So you want to turn her off.
She wants to kill some of humanity.
Some of humanity to save the rest of humanity, whatever. So sort that out. Okay, I will do, yeah. And if anyone doesn't believe you, then just say this phrase and this hologram will show again, regardless of who you're around. But I trust you to not show it to the wrong person. So he then goes to his police chief, goes, I know why he's dead. Yeah. This is why we need to turn this thing off.
What's the password?
What do you mean?
Well, you said there's a password.
Oh, there's a password, yeah. It's iRobot.
Right, okay.
Say the password. Police chief goes, oh, that's really bad. I trust his judgment because he's the creator of all robots. Show it to Bruce Greenwood in the office.
Yeah.
And he'll go, oh, shit, he knew what he was talking about. I should probably sort that out. End of movie.
Yeah. Do you think he would have gone, look, detective, robots don't hurt people. They just don't.
Yeah, but he's dead, isn't he?
Who?
The guy in this hologram is dead at the hands of a robot.
Bruce Greenwood's
Yeah, I know. That would be my response to him. If he said, oh, robots don't hurt anyone, I go, what about this man
who is dead
from a robot? He died from robots.
Hearsay, conjecture.
It's not hearsay. It's come from the horse's mouth.
Yeah, but the horse can lie.
Great. Okay, fine. Don't shut them down. See what I care, Bruce Greenwood. Any final thoughts?
No, only that we should get the hell out of here.
Yeah.
It's been a long one.
A marathon.
Whew. Thank you very much for listening as far as you have. I've been Joe and Chris has joined me. If you've got thoughts on how to survive in iRobot or last week's movie, The Matrix, we'll revisit that one day. Or next week's movie. Next week we're starting our big run on John Carpenter season.
Yeah.
With a listener recommendation for Escape from New York.
Yeah, it's a 80s classic.
Followed the following week by another Carpenter classic, They Live, starring Rowdy Roddy Piper.
Yeah, well, we've done a few John Carpenter films already. Halloween, The Thing, obviously. And gearing up for the new Halloween, obviously.
When's that out?
October, which isn't directed by him, I don't think, but still.
It was a
He's
joke,
involved.
by the way. It's called Halloween. And set you up for it.
Great.
It's been a long day.
Yeah. Shall we depart?
If you've got thoughts on how you'd survive in those movies, howtosurviveshow@gmail.com is our email address. You can tweet us at howtosurvivepod, or you can leave us a 5-star review with your thoughts on the movie on your podcatcher of choice.
Yes.
Probably Apple Podcasts.
Yeah. And like we said, next week, Escape from New York. Look forward to it. See you then. Thanks for listening. And until next week, podcast terminated.